A disclaimer, this is not an episode about Sydney's annual light show Vivid, but I am going to start with it, so stick with me if you're not a Sydney-sider. If you haven't heard of Vivid, some background. It's a free 2-week light festival that takes over the harbour city every winter. It debuted in 2009 to rave reviews and quickly became a must-visit for both locals and tourists drawn to the incredible art installations throughout the CBD and along the harbour. It was a boon for small businesses too, who found their bars and restaurants heaving in the usually quiet winter months. But post-COVID, the feedback has been less than glowing, culminating in the worst reviews the festival has ever had this year. Criticism covered a lack of light displays, too many installations being put behind a paywall, expensive and mediocre food choices, and a lack of atmosphere. People flocked to the internet to complain. The term enshittification was thrown around a lot, as was the idea that everything, from live events to clothes, coffee, housing, and everything in between, is just a bit shit right now. So, is it? Why are so many people feeling this way? And is there anything that can be done about it? Or are we just a bunch of whingers who need to get over it? All loaded questions, and who better to help answer them than Josh Zepps, who loves an uncomfy chat on his podcast, Uncomfortable Conversations. Josh, thanks so much for joining us on
Lovely
the
to be
briefing today.
here.
You're back again. Look, I want to start with Vivid, and I don't want to turn our non-Sydney listeners off.
No.
But this is the entry point.
They're not
to
missing
this.
anything. Don't worry.
This is the entry point to the conversation. It is a fascinating look at enshittification in action, if you believe that that's what's happened to Vivid. So what was once a must-see cultural event in Sydney, I know you disagree.
Was it?
We'll get to that.
Was it?
People loved Vivid, whether you like it or not.
People said that people loved Vivid, Sasha. People said that people loved Vivid. You go like, do you love Vivid? It's all right. But people love Vivid.
People love Vivid.
Everyone loved Vivid.
I
Okay,
believe-
let's take that as a starting point.
I believe in it. Anyway, it was described as a must-see event. People flocked to it. It got really popular. This year, it's been plagued by complaints. Crap installations, everything behind a paywall, bad food, no vibe. Do you think the whingers have a point about Vivid?
The whingers have always had a point about Vivid, but the whingers may not have a larger point about the enshittification of everything to the extent that they think that they do. So the Vivid, if you're not in from Sydney, here's the experience of Vivid. You're walking through Darling Harbour, and you suddenly realise there are a lot of people who are walking very, very slowly, and they're blocking your way, and they're gazing up at the sky, and they can't tell their ass from a teacup,
And it's
as you
cold.
might say. And it's cold. It's the middle of winter.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to get to Central Station, and they're blocking your way. And then you go, I wonder why there are all these people here. And then you go, oh, look, there's a giant inflatable bright green frog. They're all here to look at the frog.
Yep.
And you go, well, why are they out here in the cold standing to look at it? Oh, and look, here's another little string of fairy lights leading up to the frog. And then there's a small jumping castle, not large enough for 14 children to be inside with some lights shining on it. I never understood it.
Yeah.
Now I feel like people have, like corporations and the government have gotten in, they've gone, people really love wandering around in the cold, trying to find a bright green inflatable frog. Let's make more of them and let's charge them $1,470 for a family to go into the Botanic Gardens and look at a bright green frog. I don't really understand. I think just because I'm a Sydney-sider, so I was just walking through all of those places anywhere.
Yeah.
And it always felt to me like a way to try to persuade people in Orange that there's a reason to come to Sydney this weekend, you know?
Yeah, no, I get it.
But I think this does touch on this bigger thing of look, Aussies have always loved a rule. We love a rule, and we love the kind of corporatization. We love mandatory fun, I feel. And I feel like part of the whole concept of enshittification
Yep.
is the corporatization and the government co-option of mandatory fun. Like, you're not allowed to have spontaneous fun. You're not allowed to do what we did when I visited my friend in Switzerland recently, where we just saw a river and there was a bridge over a fast-moving glacial river, and there were teenagers just jumping off into this hazardous fast-moving river. So my friend and I just took our T-shirts off and jumped into the river and had a great time, and I smashed my leg on an underwater rock, and it
Oh.
was okay, but that's life, right?
Yes.
If someone proposed doing that in Australia, there'd be 17 different commissions as to the safety and the health and this and that, and they'd put up they put up barricades, and then you'd have bouncers along the edge of the river with exit areas that have underwater divers checking where the rocks are.
Yes.
And they'd have, it'd be mandatory. It'd be like very structured. And I feel like shittification is people slightly getting fed up with that. And hopefully younger people going, you know what, maybe we could have a rave. But you couldn't because there'd be noise complaints.
Oh, yeah. You can't open a pub. You can't build apartments next to a pub because the apartment dwellers will inevitably complain about the pub.
Of course.
Happens everywhere. The term enshittification was coined by a British-Canadian blogger who was using it to describe initially the decline of social media platforms, saying they start great and then once profit-making comes into it, they end up shit. Now it's being used to talk about everything from events like Vivid to food to coffee to housing to governments in general. How do you think it's managed to crack into the vernacular?
Well, I think there are a few things. There is the actual thing that I just alluded to, which is the hyper-corporatization and kind of the strictures that we find around the way that we're permitted to express ourselves and have fun. The lack of kind of loosey-goosey, hedonistic, rambunctious fun and the imposition of highly corporatized fun. You can see the same thing with Mardi Gras and Pride and things like that started out as very organic, rebellious freak shows back in the 60s and have now, it's like Mazda brings you pride, that kind of thing. Then there's also probably the fact that we're all going a little bit crazy on social media, that encourages a certain amount of negativity and whining and FOMO and we're living in our heads and inside of algorithms instead of actually touching the grass and getting out there and going out with people and having fun with real human beings.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably doing something corrosive to the way that we understand and interpret the fun that we're having versus the fun that supposedly other people are pretending to have on Instagram. And then there are the real actual, cost of living crises, which I think can also be overblown because there are various psychological reasons why, last year, for example, we talk a lot about the cost of living, and it's obviously really, really hard for people at the bottom end of the spectrum of the economic ladder at the moment, and I don't mean to deny that. But for the median person, for the average person, we think things are worse than they are because we notice prices going up and we don't notice our wages going up because we think that we deserved the wage rise, but we blame other people for the price rises. So I internally have this conversation with myself where I'm like, I can't believe a coffee costs $6.80. It's supposed to be $4.20, and before that, it was supposed to be $3.
$2.50 once upon a time.
Exactly. You're showing your age, Sasha.
No, I'm sorry.
But what actually happened last year was that the minimum wage went up by 8.65%. Other awards went up by 5.75%. Last year, overall wages increased by more than inflation, but you get a wage, you get a pay rise, and you go, yeah, I'm awesome.
Yeah,
I got a pay rise because I'm awesome. But why is the coffee increasing in money? Because that's what happens. So there's the economic factor of the pandemic-induced inflation spike.
Do you think people feel hard done by where it's like everything's more expensive? I go to this event, or I try and buy a coffee or buy clothes, and it's harder for me, and therefore everything sucks. Like, is that the loop that's playing out in people's head?
Doesn't help, does it?
Yeah,
it doesn't help that that your personal experience is more stressful at the same time as other things aren't as fun. But I think, there is... I feel like there's a perfect storm of corporations and governments kind of co-opting things that were supposed to be organic at the same time as we're under financial stress, even if that is mostly illusory because we are actually doing okay on average. At the same time as we have algorithms and social media kind of feeding into, I guess, a narrative of shittiness. Enshittification is cool in a way that being positive in an unruffled way is not cool.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly live at a moment where feeling like a victim and feeling like, you're part of an oppressed minority, for example, and that the things have never been worse, and the man is on your back, and that the little guy can't get ahead. That is a narrative that gets you a lot more brownie points if you say it at the pub than if you're like, I don't know, I think it's pretty good, great.
Yeah.
Everyone looks at you like, don't you know what's happening in Gaza? Yeah, I do, but it's not happening here to us right now in this particular pub. So there's a kind of a slightly virtue signal-y kind of social justice-y thing probably feeding into this as well, which is why is the world just worse than it's ever been? Every generation has its enshittification. Every generation has its big problems. At the moment, the problems that we face, which are very real, climate chaos, the destabilization of liberal democracies, Ukraine, Gaza, all these things, the cost of living, real things, nowhere near as bad as the things that most generations have had to deal with. But we get to whine about them more on social media, so we feel good about ourselves.
Yeah. So in that sense, you believe enshittification is real and it is happening to an extent, but every generation deals with its own version
Exactly.
of enshittification.
That's right. And at the moment, the meme of enshittification is being exacerbated by social media.
Is it just capitalism in action? Is that what this is in terms of not just Vivid, but everything we've kind of touched on? You know, is it a government or a company's responsibility to put away the balance book for our benefit to have a good time?
Well, I think it's the government. I think the government is to blame more than companies. Companies are mindless, face-eating machines, right? They will make a profit, and that is what they will do. It's up to us, the people, through our elected representatives, to push back against companies and go, no, actually, this is our society. We are the demos. They don't run everything. So, like, to some extent, like, it's our botanic gardens. Why are we being charged to go into the botanic gardens during Vivid? Like, this is our these are our common spaces. And I mean, I would say, you know, this is slightly unpopular, but I just think we shouldn't just get rid of like corporate impositions on things like arts events. We should also dramatically dial down the amount of compliance that the government requires us to do in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
And I think as Australians, we have this constant conflict between our supposed love of the good life and our sense of hedonism and our actual kind of deep intrinsic fear and sense of obedience and compliance and our love of rules. We're a very orderly people who present themselves as being a deeply hedonistic people, but those two things are in conflict. And the enshittification is just when the orderliness and the rules and the compliance, I think, get the edge over something that's organic and natural.
So to wrap up then, you know, people feeling like this flock to social media, they talk about it, they kind of end up in this echo chamber with each other. Yeah, everything's shit. Is it a matter of, you know, like what's your advice to someone who is sitting there feeling this way, like everything is shit and they want to complain about it to their mate or on social media? Is it holding governments to account in this sense where we're talking about the links to corporate and all of that, or is it going outside and touching some grass?
Yeah, it's touching grass. I mean, just delete your social media account and stop complaining about it. You don't need Vivid. You never needed Vivid. Like, life is vivid. Life is full of colours. Like, go and, you know, grab some mates and go down to a local park.
Glow sticks.
And get your glow sticks and have a few beers. Now, unfortunately, we live in a country where if you have a few beers in the park, it's entirely possible the police will come up to you and pour the beer out in front of your face and give you a ticket, right? So that's another thing. Vote for governments that will raise speed limits, allow drinking in parks, allow later venues to be open later, will abolish lockout laws, will abolish anti-drinking laws, like tolerate a certain amount of chaos, like learn to tolerate a certain amount of chaos. And yeah, try to vote in ways and talk in ways that encourage people to have as large and capacious as possible an understanding of what the good life is, so that it doesn't always have to be filtered through corporate and government, you know, blinders.
Yeah, it's a good take, I think. Good advice. I'll go out and touch some grass.
You and I can go out. We can touch some grass.
There's no grass around us, though.
No,
so we're in a cityscape.
Concrete wasteland.
We'll touch the concrete.
Get out of Sydney.
Okay.
Go to Orange.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
That is all for this episode of The Briefing. Thanks so much for listening. Look, before you go, we would love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. And today's in-studio chat with Josh will be going up on our YouTube channel. To check it out, search Listener Newsroom and don't forget to subscribe. Josh's YouTube channel is worth a look as well. Search Josh Zepps. I'm Sasha Barbagat. We'll see you next time.